The U.S. out, Russia in. Tonight, these photos show Russian forces moving into northern Syria as U.S. troops evacuate some of their bases. Some Russians are making fun of what they consider U.S. weakness. This video on Twitter showing a Russian-speaking man on what appears to be an empty U.S. base saying, "Let's see how the Americans lived." And Turkey is thumbing its nose at the U.S. too, intensifying its bombardment of U.S. allies, the Kurds, just hours after the White House said it would no longer tolerate Turkey's assault. Tonight, I spoke to General Mazloum Kobani, commander of all Kurdish forces here. He says President Trump promised him last night he'd stop the Turkish onslaught.
Do you think that President Trump will keep his word to you?
He wants to keep his promise, he says. But if you look at what's happening, it is not as he said. The general accused Turkey of pursuing a deliberate campaign to ethnically cleanse 2 million Kurds here, and that Turkey is using extremist militias, which U.S. officials say include former ISIS members, to drive people away or kill them. So the Kurds who fought with American forces against ISIS have turned to Russia and its ally, the Syrian army of Bashar al-Assad, to save them.
Why did you decide to realign with the Syrian government?
He says, I can say it was the best of bad options.
Tonight, President Trump is sending Vice President Pence to negotiate with Turkey and is threatening tougher economic sanctions. But Turkey's president just said the sanctions don't worry him.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.